Welcome to Pensare Basketball, and today we're going to talk about something that maybe a lot of people don't want to talk about right now, which is the Toronto Raptors are 6-5, but it is in spite of the synergy of their starters. And I'm going to make a case that I tried to make in yesterday's live that this team is heading for a cliff or an iceberg or whatever metaphor you want to use, and how perhaps solving the problem before everybody knows you have a problem might be the wisest place to go, and that's currently the conundrum that Bobby Webster and Darko Rajakovic find themselves in, which is they do have a starting lineup that a lot of people, a lot of credible analysts suggested to the start before the start of this year, this probably is not going to work. Now, the Toronto Raptors are 6-5, so that masks a lot of issues. Winning hides a lot of things. Winning can hide synergy issues, chemistry issues. And if you want an example of a team that maybe should have pulled the plug but didn't pull the plug when it was obvious they should have pulled the plug, look no further than the New Orleans Pelicans, right? You have Zion Williamson, you have Trey Murphy, you don't have a chance to go forward. And instead, you double down and you make a mistake, which is you trade away a first round pick. And now you're landlocked into a team that is not going to make the playoffs. And it's terrible. If you want another example, consider the Memphis Grizzlies with John Morant. When they made the move to trade Desmond Bane, it was very obvious to me and pretty much everybody that they were taking a step back. And John Morant has obviously been unhappy with the new offense, with the new coach. And so now that you're losing, and now that John Morant's performance has suffered because he doesn't like the offense or because his performance is, stagnating for another reason, now everybody knows you have a problem. So not only do you know that you have a problem, everybody knows you have a problem. And if you want to go further than that, perhaps you have to look at this team's own history with Fred, Pascal, OG. Now, there was an obviously very loud podcast back in 2021, 2022 saying, no, you got to sell the pieces and you got to rebuild right now. Something that I think a lot of Dallas Mavericks fans are saying right now around Cooper Flagg, Anthony Davis, and the multiple timeline approach. It's the same thing that a lot of Warriors fans were saying when the Warriors tried their two timeline approach. So in today's episode, I want to dissect the Raptors starting lineup, why they can't win minutes, what's going on with the spacing, and I also want to include 9 trades that will fix it. Now, these are not going to be home run hits. These are not going to be you trade RJ Barrett, they give you Zion Williamson. This is not going to be that type of lie. This is not going to be from a homer perspective. This is going to be realistic. And the trades are going to get crazier and crazier until we get to the 9th trade, which is about as crazy as can be. But I promise they will be realistic. So, first of all, let's get to it. Okay, so what's the right format for this? I believe the right format would be this. Okay, perfect. Okay, so let's go with 9 trades. First of all, the starting lineup, right? The Toronto Raptors have a clear problem with their starting lineup. And here's the 5-man data for all the lineups that the Raptors have used, sorted from the most frequent to the least frequent. And you will notice that their starters are losing minutes. Their alternate starters with Colin Murray-Boyles and their 4 starters losing minutes. You will notice that there is a lineup that wins minutes at a ridiculous rate, and that is the one with Mamukelashvili. Then you will notice again there's a losing lineup, and this time substituting Ochai Agbaji, which is the lineup that they used against the Philadelphia 76ers. That lineup was atrocious. It lost a ton of minutes. Then you have another winning lineup, but that includes Jamal Shed and Colin Murray-Boyles and Sandro Mamukelashvili and Grady Dick with just Brandon Ingram. Basically, the Raptors are winning games in spite of their starters. Now, I want to actually tell you why that's a really big problem. Pull this off for a sec, make myself centered. Why is that a big problem? Well, first of all, the Raptors haven't beaten a good team. Have you noticed that? There's not a single good team. Now, if you're blind, you'll call the Cavaliers a good team. If you're honest, you'll say that wasn't a good team. That was a depleted team. If you're blind, you'll call the Milwaukee Bucks a good team. If you're being honest, you'll say they're on a second night of a back-to-back. They just won right down the wire against the Pacers, and they didn't show up that game. Again, I'm not trying to be negative. Please understand that I'm not trying to be negative. 6-5 is still a blessing. But understand that you beat the Memphis Grizzlies without John Morant. You did not beat a good team. And most good teams share one thing very obviously in common, and that is that their starters usually win minutes. they also share another thing in common, which is their starters are usually their five best players. Now, it's not always the case. Obviously, the San Antonio Spurs, back in the day, used to bring Manu Ginobili off the bench, and still, that starting lineup still won a ton of their minutes. So, why does this problem loom very large in terms of future projections, and why might the Raptors be smart to address this problem before everybody in the league realizes you have a problem? This is to take a brief pause. When we talk about betting markets, prediction markets, what happens when people don't believe something is going to happen is you get very good odds. You get favorable odds on that prediction. If you believed in 2014, if Polymarket or Kashi or Kalshi or whatever was around in 2014, and you believed that Donald Trump was going to be the president of the United States, you probably could have gotten in on very favorable odds. But by the time 2015 rolled around, it became far, far more likely. And so the odds were far less. It's the same thing with trade markets and roster construction. If you consider this from the perspective of solving problems before other people know you have problems, well, you haven't really faced the gauntlet of great teams. You had a brief blip early in the season against San Antonio and Houston, which are two of the better teams that you faced, and you got blown out. You can look at last year when you faced really good teams, the Boston Celtics, the OKC Thunder, they blew you out by 30, 40 points. Now, of course, you've added Brandon Ingram, but Brandon Ingram alone does not bridge the gap of 40 points. It's impossible to do that. And your starting lineup is going to continue to lose minutes until you make a change. However, go face a couple of tough teams, get blown up by 30, 40 points. Suddenly, the whole league is on alert. And now everyone knows you have to make a trade. Suddenly, your RJ Barrett, who is super effective and super efficient right now and is hitting his threes, he now looks like he did last night against the Brooklyn Nets. He looks like a shell of himself. Emmanuel Quickly, who has finally turned a corner and has actually been playing really well over the last 4 games, he goes through a cold stretch against those really good teams. Your entire lineup starts failing, and suddenly people are demanding trades. It's interesting if you go on NBA Reddit communities right now, if you go on any trade forum, the teams that are most frequently like they got to make a trade are all the teams that are drastically underperforming. If you look at the teams that have to make a trade, it's the Clippers. Why? Because they're underperforming. It's the Dallas Mavericks. Why? Because they're underperforming. It's the Memphis Grizzlies. It's the Indiana Pacers. Those are the teams. The teams that don't need to make a trade right now, the Miami Heat. That doesn't mean the Miami Heat don't have problems. It doesn't mean the Miami Heat shouldn't make trades. It just means that the public sentiment has not actually turned on Miami yet. But it's the same thing with the Chicago Bulls. So the Chicago Bulls a perfect roster? No, they started 5-1, and now they've lost a bunch straight. And I think they're probably going to lose tonight to the very undermanned Detroit Pistons. And right now, you're going to see that all the good vibes of the first 6 games are going to dissipate very quickly. So right now, the Raptors have a brief moment in time. If you are somehow able to beat Cleveland tomorrow, there's a very, very going to be a very brief window where you can go on a real big run and you can fake be a good team. Now, we all know, anyone who's been watching, that it is the Grady Dick minutes, the Sandro Mamukelashvili minutes, the Jameson Battle heroics, the Jamal Shed stabilization. We know that that's what's really saving this team from the losses because they are beating the shit out of second units. But why might this problem be exacerbated against better first units? Well, simply put, if your first unit is losing average minutes against average teams, if your first unit cannot even get off to a good start against the Brooklyn Nets, who are also undermanned and are terrible and are without their second best scorer, if your first unit cannot win minutes against the worst teams, what happens when you go up against the best teams who already have first units that are winning their lineup minutes by 12, 13 points, and you have a first unit that's losing their lineup minutes by 5 points? What happens is not what you think would happen. What you think would happen was they would continue to win their minutes by 15, and you would continue to lose your minutes by 5. But actually, what happens when a great team goes up against a really bad team and both teams are trying is the lineup differential stretches. And so instead of a 20-point differential between you and the Nuggets, you'll have a 40-point differential or a 35-point differential, and you won't be able to succeed. And that's when the whole league is going to wake up to the fact that you have a problem. So let me try and do something that I tried to do in 2021, 2022, And message to the Toronto Raptors coaching staff, message to the Toronto Raptors front office staff. You have a problem and people haven't woken up to it. You'd be smart to wake up to it really quickly. Now, continuing on, let's isolate for the four-man lineups. Now, hold on. First of all, you'll notice something really funny here. Do you notice what all of your negative lineups have in common? Your overwhelmingly negative lineups have in common? They all include your four highest paid players. Ingram, Barrett, Quickly, and Barnes are substantially negative. They're just a negative unit. They're a negative unit. And I'll prove it to you by isolating for four-man lineups. Your four-man lineup over 176 minutes. Ingram, Barrett, Quickly, Barnes. Makes sense, right? Jakob's been injured. Net rating, negative 6.6. And you've played largely bad teams and depleted teams. That lineup is going to be like 13 or 14 below zero when you go up against good teams. Again, where is your positive lineup? Well, the Raptors don't have a lot of positive lineups. In their four-man units, their most frequently used four-man units, the first positive lineup is actually all the way at the bottom, and it's Barrett, Quickly, Barnes, and Mamukelashvili. If you actually isolate for Barnes plus every single starter on this team, the only one that is even remotely positive, and it's plus 1.1, is Quickly. He's negative with Barrett. He's negative with Yak. He's overwhelmingly negative with Yak. It's Barnes and Yak are like negative 13. He's negative 6 with Ingram. So this is not good. Your highest paid players are not good together. That sucks. And they are only good when two of them are playing with three bench players. So obviously the solution is very simple. Just bench one of your starters. Start Mamukelashvili. But we know the Raptors are not going to do that because there is pecking order, seniority, and politics. So you have to make a trade. Now consider what the 2019 Raptors looked like. So here's the lineup data for the 2019 Toronto Raptors. And I'll take you through a few NBA champions or really good teams and what their lineup data looked like. You'll see that their most frequent lineup that Nick Nurse used that year was Lowry, Ibaka, Danny Green, Kawhi Leonard, and Pascal Siakam. They won their minutes across 547 minutes. They won their minutes by 9.2. Lowry, Ibaka, Green, Siakam, and Van Vliet, when they went super small with the backcourt, that lineup, which of course cued, future growth and future success, because that's the lineup that actually made them super successful when Kawhi left, that lineup was surprisingly even better at plus 15.3. Ibaka, Green, Leonard, Siakam, and Van Vliet, so that's the starting lineup minus minus Lowry, and with Fred was plus 15.7. Then there was a plus 13.7. You have to go all the way to the bottom for a 48-minute lineup sample, which was actually negative, and that was CJ Miles, Jonas Valanciunas, DeLon Wright, OG Anunoby, and Fred VanVleet. And guess what happened? That lineup got traded because CJ Miles and Jonas Valanciunas were gone. DeLon Wright and Jonas Valanciunas were gone. And that's the point. When you find out that you have a problem, you fix it before everybody knows you have a problem. People were not like, oh my God, the Raptors are so bad, they have to trade Jonas Valanciunas. That's why you got Marc Gasol for him, because people didn't know you had a problem. You were a winning team, but internally, you identified that you were better with Ibaka. And you thought to yourself, well, why don't we just get a player of Ibaka's archetype, i.e. a big who can shoot and protect the rim, but an even better player than Ibaka? And that's why you trade for Marc Gasol. So moving on past this, and please give this video a like for the little basketball to bounce if you find this interesting. This is the Toronto Raptors 2021 roster. And this is Scotty's rookie season. Again, coached by Nick Nurse. So these are both Nick Nurse coach lineups, and Nick is a very analytically driven coach. He's obviously going to pay attention when a five-man lineup is losing a lot of minutes. And it just so happened that the five-man lineup of Khem Birch, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., and Scotty Barnes, which was their opening day starting lineup, was losing a ton of minutes. That lineup became positive when you move Barnes to the 5. So it was Barnes at the 5, Siakam at the 4, Fred VanVleet at the 1, OG at the 2, Gary at the 3, Gary at the 2. That was really the way that they made it work. They substituted Barnes in that lineup for Kem Birch. But when you had Kem Birch starting in place of, I guess in this sense, it was OG Anunoby, that sucked. Okay. Then you move on to where do we get? We get a very overwhelmingly positive lineup, which was Chris Boucher, Gary Trent Jr., Scotty Barnes, Fred VanVleet, Pascal Siakam. Then you get another negative lineup, which also included Kem Birch. So it was Kem Birch, Pascal Siakam, Gary Trent Jr., Malachi Flynn, and Scotty Barnes. So obviously, you ended up moving off of Kem Birch a year later for a reason. He was part of a lot of negative lineups, and you just signed him to a new contract. So you had a vested interest to play him. You didn't want to depreciate the asset, but ultimately you ended up taking an L on that asset. You'll notice that every single team we're going to look at, it's very rare that their top minute lineup loses minutes. Now consider the 2012-2013 Miami Heat with Bosh, D Wade, and and LeBron James. Their top lineups won their minutes by 13.2, 19.2, 16.8. That 16.8, sorry, the 19.2 lineup was Shane Battier, LeBron James, Chris Bosh, D Wade, and Mario Chalmers. So when they moved Bosh to the 5 and played Shane Battier and LeBron James at the 3-4, that's when that lineup truly achieved mastery. Now, it's also worth noting, and really worth noting, that sometimes starting lineups being worse than bench units does not necessarily mean the player in the bench unit is better than the starting lineup guy. It doesn't always mean that, because your net rating is ultimately dependent on who you play against. It just means that sometimes transitional lineups unlock something that's true about your team that you don't realize is true. I think Sandro Mamukelashvili being so positive for this team unlocks the fact that this team desperately needs spacing. And we'll take a look at a few picture examples of how Mamu, Jameson Battle, Grady Dick have unlocked space for Barnes and Ingram. Consider the Warriors, right? So this is the first year of Durant Warriors, right? What is their most frequent lineup? Ersan Ilyasova, Morris, Jackson, Drummond. Wait a second. This is wrong. What? What the hell is this? This is a mistake. I move forward. This is a mistake. Okay. So this is current year Denver Nuggets. Okay. Notice their starting lineup of Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Cam Johnson, and Christian Brown. They are winning their minutes by 12.7. That is what makes that team really, really good. But their second and third lineups, but one of which includes, both of which actually include Tim Hardaway Jr., are losing minutes. If I'm a coaching staff, I'm looking at this saying maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. plus who we're playing in these lineups doesn't work. You have to sometimes look at certain players who together create bad chemistry, bad synergy, right? You might have two players that have too much redundancy, too much overlap, or maybe their skill sets don't complement enough, that they're too different to play together. So it's basically, come down to, when you talk about matching up two players in a lineup, it's always, are they too similar or are they too different to work? What you want is players who are just similar and just dissimilar enough. And that's when you get like the Warriors death lineup. So you consider like most of the lineups they run, the most high frequent lineups, 154 minutes of that starting lineup, that lineup massively wins minutes. It wins minutes on defense, offense. It is winning minutes largely because it makes a ton of sense. You look at those players, Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic, Aaron Gordon, Cam Johnson, Christian Brown. That lineup is a championship lineup. It has everything perfect. It's not 5 ball dominant guys. It's not 5 post hubs. It's not 4, movement shooters. It's a little bit of everything. You have flashes to the rim. You have secondary creation. You have tertiary ball handling. You have wing level athleticism. You have multiple good defenders to mask the not so good defenders. You have an average defender, a large defender, and a willing defender being complemented by 2 good defenders. And obviously, you look at that second lineup and you replace Peyton Watson and Bruce Brown in there, and the thing goes to negative because Jonas Valanciunas is just so much worse than Nikola Jokic. That's part of it. Or maybe that's something that I need to look at, if I'm the Nuggets coaching staff from David Adelman, and I'm just like, what is making that lineup not work, and what tinkering thing could I do to that lineup to make it work? Obviously, Jokic versus the bench. So Nikola Jokic, Tim Hardaway Jr., Bruce Brown, Christian Brown, and Peyton Watson. That is Jokic plus bench. That lineup has a plus 42.6 rating. Why? Because benches can't deal with Jokic, and Jokic unlocks everybody. Nikola Jokic is the best player in the world. Any lineup with him is probably going to be positive, and if it's not positive, Something is wrong with that lineup. It's not him, it's the lineup. So moving forward, look at the New York Knicks this year. What is their most frequent lineup? Well, their most frequent lineup with Landry Shamet, Carl Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, and Jalen Brunson, due to the injuries of Mitchell Robinson. That lineup is actually barely positive. It's a 2.1. And the Knicks are off to a somewhat not so great start. But look at those next two lineups. Carl Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby, Josh Hart, Jalen Brunson, and Mikal Bridges. Again, 5 guys who played together last year. They have a plus 24.2. And then Carl Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby, Mikal Bridges, Jalen Brunson, and Mitchell Robinson, that unlocks it to plus 65.1. Granted, 26-minute sample size, but they are obliterating teams with that lineup. You'll notice another one. Jordan Clarkson, Carl Anthony Towns, OG Anunoby, Landry Shamet, and Deuce McBride. They have a massive positive in 17 minutes, 31.9. These lineups are telling you that basketball is not that complicated. You need players who are dissimilar, and you need players who are similar enough. Now, shout outs to Keeks. And she said, per NBA tracking data, the Raptors have been wide open. Defender is 6+ feet away for 64.2% of their three-point attempts this season. That's the second largest rate in the NBA, behind only the Bulls. It's up from 55.4% last year. Okay. Let me say something. That's not a positive stat. You think that's a positive stat. But it's a negative stat. Let me explain. There's 2 reasons that someone might be wide open, and they can both be true. Number 1, you're wide open because you're that good at finding wide open shooters. Number 2, you're wide open because the people who are taking the shots are not players that are being sufficiently guarded. This is the correct thought. Teams do not respect us. Look at some of your highest volume 3-point shooters. Now think of your best 3-point shooters. The question you need to ask is, are the wrong people taking the threes? Now, it's interesting because the Raptors are making threes right now, so no one's complaining. If they were not making threes, then everyone would be complaining. But there's something interesting that happens when a player isn't guarded in one place. It means another player is guarded. So when you think about being number 2 in the league in open 3-pointers, obviously a part of it is you're taking a lot of threes in early transition. You run a lot. You have a pretty decently high pace. So that's going to help you find open threes. That's a good thing. There's also the point of, does it really matter that Colin Murray-Boyles, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett are wide open on threes? They're open for a reason. And them being open makes it very difficult for Brandon Ingram to drive. You can't have 3 players in a starting lineup that nobody respects from 3, even when 2 of them are hitting 40% of their threes, because that's how you end up in spacing hell. And that's where the Raptors currently find themselves. They currently find themselves in spacing hell. Let me continue by looking at some examples. Now look at the players on the court. Grady Dick, Jameson Battle. That's RJ Barrett, Scotty Barnes, and Emmanuel Quickley. Notice that you have 2 players who are not very respected from 3, but you have 3 players who are. 3 players who are very respected from 3. Do you see how wide open the paint is right now? Not only do you not have somebody standing in the paint, you also don't have anybody that you can actually leave open other than Scotty and RJ. And when you make Scotty and RJ the 2 people involved in this action, the defense can't help. And so RJ is able to make this pass to Scotty, and he's able to get right to the rim 100% of the time. Teams can't guard this. The reason that they can't guard this, 1, is because they're the Brooklyn Nets. They can't guard anybody. But also, number 2, because you cannot get 15 feet off of Grady and you cannot get 15 feet off of Battle because it's going to be an automatic pass. I do love that the Toronto Raptors pass the ball as much as they do. They often pass to the wrong person, and they often have the wrong people on the court. Consider another screen grab here from Scotty Barnes in early transition. Once again, this time with Jacoby Walter, Jameson Battle, Grady Dick, and Jamal Shed. Once again, you have 2 players who are not very respected from 3, which is Scotty and Jameson Battle. And Jamal Shed. And then you have 3 players who are very respected from 3, which is Jacoby, Jameson Battle, and Grady Dick. You'll notice that the defenders react accordingly. And what ends up happening is Jamison goes across and Jamal Shed, who has the basketball, is able to pass him the basketball. Now, too often, the problem with the Raptors starting lineup is the one guy or two guys who can positively create space are the ones who have the basketball. And the three guys who can't create space almost never have the basketball unless they're right about to score. Scotty Barnes should probably have the basketball a lot more. RJ Barrett and Scotty Barnes should be involved in almost everything when they're on the court together with Jakob Poeltl. Too often, though, they're free to just pass the ball along the perimeter and use Jakob as a screener and not let Jakob get a touch. Now, I understand that Jakob Poeltl was dropping a ton of passes early in the season, and so I understand maybe why you wouldn't want to give him a touch, but you have to involve him if he's specifically on the court to do that. Now, one of the biggest reasons that Emmanuel Quickley is playing a hell of a lot better over the last 4 games is because Jakob Poeltl has played 3 of those games, and he has looked a hell of a lot better than he did to start the season. And of course, Emmanuel Quickley, just like Davion Mitchell, just like Dennis Schroeder, just like Fred VanVleet, every point guard has been blessed with Jakob Poeltl's screen setting and paint finishing. And what I would say is it's low-hanging fruit because it's not really going to work in the playoffs, and it doesn't involve your best players. The Toronto Raptors have a problem, which is that they have a lot of really good players that don't fit. And the too many fans get bogged down into the how can you ask me to trade a good player? But what happens when you try to build a team is you identify your best player. At most, you identify your 2 best players, and then you do everything to construct the other 15 guys, including the starting lineup, including the lead bench guys, to build around those 2 guys. The Toronto Raptors clearly are building around Scotty Barnes, I think, but it doesn't feel like they know that. Or if they do know that, they don't seem to understand how to do it. And it's just a weird thing. There are obviously players that work with Scotty, and the lineup data for the last 4 years would prove that to you. There are certain players who don't work with Scotty. And I've made a really big fuss about this that, guys like Lauri Markkanen, Zach LaVine, guys like this, De'Aaron Fox, probably would work with Scotty. And then there are guys that just don't work with Scotty. And Jakob Poeltl is a clear example of a guy who, unless he and Scotty run pick and roll with 3 shooters, is probably not going to work with Scotty. So Scotty plus Yak plus 3 great shooters. So if you were to run a lineup of, let's just say, Scotty, Jamison Battle. So Scotty at the 1, Jamison Battle at the 2, or Grady at the 2, Jamison Battle at the 3, Brandon Ingram at the or Mamu at the 4, Yak at the 5. That lineup could work. It could work very well, and it probably would work because you have guys who don't need the basketball to be effective. You have guys who move off the ball. You have enough defense between Scotty and Yak that hopefully the perimeter guys can do enough. It doesn't have a lot of penetration though, so maybe you would replace Grady with Emmanuel Quickley, and then maybe it could work. But then will Emmanuel Quickley allow Scotty to run the pick and roll with Jakob Poeltl when he's better at running the pick and roll with Jakob? So it's just a matter of sacrificing for the greater whole, And unfortunately, Scotty is definitely better with the ball in his hands than away from the basketball. He's better involved in the play than he's not involved in the play. Because when you don't involve him in the play, which is to say, San Antonio, the game against San Antonio, where he just kind of jogged from corner to corner, the game last night, where I just don't think he was very involved in the offense, didn't take a lot of shots. Those are the games that you look bad, right? When you involve him as a screener, as a ball handler, as an outlet guy, as a transition ball handler, as an offensive rebounder, when he involves himself on the defensive end, that's usually when the Raptors are at their best. Now consider this spacing. You have Scotty and RJ on the opposite side of the floor, and you have Brandon Ingram trying to drive downhill. Do you see the spacing? This is against the Spurs. This is bad spacing. You have Harrison Barnes, you're driving right into Victor Wembanyama, and frankly, Champagne is happy to leave this for Emmanuel Quickley because he knows he has the length and time to close out. And there's just no way that Victor Wembanyama is letting Jakob Poeltl or Brandon Ingram score at the rim. Now, this was, in fairness, this was a positive possession. The Raptors did score, but I'm just trying to show you that even on these possessions they score, look how poor the spacing is. But here, the paint is wide open. It's not just because Bismack Biyombo isn't a good rebounder or a good shot blocker. In a normal sense, Bismack would be right at the rim, ready to block Emmanuel Quickley's shot into the 4th row. He can't be at the rim because Sandro Mamukelashvili is out there. So it's very simple. This defender is just out of reach to block this Emmanuel quickly drive because Grady Dick is stretching him out to the left. Bismack Biyombo can't be there because Sandro Mamukelashvili is stretching him out to the top of the key. And Ochai's man cannot completely commit because he knows that this is an easy pass to the right to Ochai Agbaji for a wide open three. This is how modern basketball has to be played. And this lineup right here of Scotty, Emmanuel Quickly, Sandro Mamukelashvili, Grady Dick, and Ochai Agbaji makes a lot of basketball sense. This lineup makes a lot of sense. Now, defensively, they're destroyed, and that's another problem. But at least offensively, this lineup makes a lot of sense. You have enough space. It's not a secret. This is not complicated. Once again, on this Ingram drive, what is Bismack Biyombo doing now? So again, this is a nice contrast between how Bismack Biyombo gets to roam the paint when Jakob Poeltl is there. So how do you get Bismack out of the way? Well, Brandon Ingram has to initiate a pick and roll on the other side instead of allowing this drive from, I'm assuming that's RJ Barrett. No, sorry. That is Jacoby Walter. You need to swing the ball to Yak's side, involve Bismack Biyombo in the screen, and then get him out of the way that way, right? Now, again, Darko believes in a free-flowing, egalitarian, you choose random offense. But random doesn't mean stupid. Random just means unpredictable. And this is stupid. You're going to drive right into a help defender, a second help defender, help in the gap, and your outlet on Harrison Barnes' side is a kick-out pass to RJ Barrett, which, by the way, will be wide open. And why will it be wide open? Because the drive was much, much more pressing to stop. And that three-point shot is something teams are willing to live with. The same thing would happen if it was a Scotty in the corner. You're putting players in positions to not succeed. Now let's talk about the trades. We are 31 minutes into this, and I want to get to some trades. So I'm going to take you through 9 trades that I think actually work for this team. And I'm sure that some people will think that I have lost my freaking mind, but I don't believe that. Okay. Let's go with trade number 1. And this is maybe a little controversial for some people, but this is the equivalent of the Rudy Gay trade, which is you get 3 very valuable role players for 1 imperfect scorer. And that is RJ Barrett and Garrett Temple going to Brooklyn for Terrence Mann, Day'Ron Sharpe, and Haywood Highsmith. Now, why do you make this trade? Well, number 1, you get 3 positive-ish defenders. That's 1 for 1 player who doesn't play and a not positive defender on even his best day. Number 2, you get a center. So you get an actual center depth so you don't get killed on the glass. 3, all 3 of these players are positionally above average rebounders. Highsmith, Mann, and Day'Ron Sharpe. 4, I think you inject yourself with a lot, in my opinion, a lot of athleticism. Okay, Gurjot Chalal. Bruh, it's been 10 games. We're incorporating Brandon Ingram into the offense. Darko offense takes time to get going. Jakob been injured, quickly getting used to his new role. What new role? Garbage ass trade. Garbage ass comment. So I think that this trade would make a lot of sense, unless, of course, you're this moron, in which case you don't know the first thing about Day'Ron Sharpe. You probably don't know the first thing about Terrence Mann, but all you see is RJ Barrett. Wow, 20 points per game score. Well, this garbage ass comment stems from ignorance. Don't be ignorant. Go watch Day'Ron Sharpe play basketball. Go watch Terrence Mann play basketball. Go watch tape of Haywood Highsmith in Miami and understand that these players are the type of role players that will actually synergize your lineups. Okay, let's move on to the next trade. This one is interesting. Jalen Suggs, Jonathan Isaac, Goga Bitadze, and Tristan Da Silva for Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett. Now, there's a little bit of a damaged goods element to this, which is you're taking a risk that Jonathan Isaac and Jalen Suggs can be healthy. But when healthy, they'd be the second and third best, or maybe first and third best defenders on your roster. So you get a mega boost for your defense. I think you get role players who play better off the ball. I think you would have to add a first round pick to this, but you are taking 2 very injury prone players for 2 not so injury prone players. And I think that Emmanuel Quickly and RJ Barrett inject positive offensive players onto a team that has been, at best, at best during the Paolo run, a top 20 offense. They have a lot of defense on their team as it is. Between Franz Wagner and Anthony Black, they've invested a ton in their defense. Now, Goga Batadze is a type of stretch big that can really help you. And Tristan da Silva is the type of young player that I feel that the Toronto Raptors could really use off their bench. So again, maybe you take De Silva out of this, maybe you add a first round swap or something like this. But I think Jalen Suggs is injury prone enough that the Magic are looking to maybe move off of his contract. And if you read his medicals and you believe he's too injury prone to trust as a starting point guard, then maybe you need to move off of that. And maybe you don't need to trade for Jalen Suggs. Maybe you need to go in another direction. But I do think this is the type of trade, which is like my problem for your problem type of trade. Now, I'm not saying RJ and Emmanuel Quickley are necessarily a problem, but if you're not going to extend to RJ and you're already having buyer's remorse on the Emmanuel Quickley contract, I think the trade on the left or the package on the left puts your ceiling as a playoff team much higher. You are now able to, when healthy, compete with the New York Knicks and the Cleveland Cavaliers. You're not better than them, but you're able to at least compete with them because I do think Jalen Suggs is a much better fit on this roster than Emmanuel Quickley when healthy. Let's move on. The next trade. And this one, again, probably not going to appeal to a lot of people. A 2028 first, RJ Barrett and Garrett Temple to the Sacramento Kings for Malik Monk, Keon Ellis, and Dario Saric. Why do the Raptors do this? Well, Malik is a really good shooter. He is extremely well respected and is exactly the type of guard that I think could really stretch the court for Scotty and Ingram. Dario is a stretch big who can probably play some spot minutes at the backup five, backup four for you. And Keon Ellis is exactly the type of player that I would want in the starting lineup with Scotty Barnes and Emmanuel Quickley. So like you're starting two. I think you would have like a defensive oriented starting two, and I think that would help. Now it is worth noting that he is up for a contract extension. He's not going to be super cheap, but I do believe that Keon Ellis is one of the most underrated players in the league, and I think that a first round pick, lottery protected, is a really small price to pay for that type of 6'6" multi switch defender. He's not as good as OG Anunoby defensively. He's not as good as Dyson Daniels, but man, he is really good as a defender. And Malik Monk, that situation in Sacramento has been going south for a while. They want to move off of him. I think they replace him with a slightly younger player in RJ Barrett. You get I would say Malik's about as bad a defender as RJ Barrett, so you're not exactly losing something there, but you are getting a major, major uptick because you don't play Malik Monk as many minutes as RJ. You get spacing, you get defense. I think this makes a lot of sense. RJ and DeMar redundant. Well, DeMar the redundant. I understand that, but Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan were redundant as well. I think that trade you might be able to sell the Kings on the idea that they're getting like a young player who can actually score 20 plus points per game. They are looking to move off of DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine very soon. RJ Barrett gives you a similar type of player to that, granted, very different, very not as good, not as talented, but a lot younger. And maybe they like the idea of RJ Barrett. I mean, they love collecting ex-Raptors. Last night I watched them start Precious Achua, Dennis Schroeder, and DeMar DeRozan. So, they like ex-Raptors. Moving on to the Portland Trailblazers. Again, not a sexy trade, but an interesting one where you eat 3 years of Jeremy Grant's contract and expiring on Robert Williams III, an excellent rim protector and a very good offensive rebounder. And you take a chance on your point guard of the future, Scoot Henderson, and hope that a change of scenery will help him out. And in exchange, the Portland Trailblazers get two players who are probably better than most of those players right now in Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. Now, why did they do this? Well, they do this if they believe that Emmanuel Quickley can replace some of what what Anthony Simons was doing for them. They do this because they want to get off of Jeremy Grant's contract. They do this because they don't really believe in Scoot Henderson as the point guard of the future, and maybe they just want to clear some way. They do this because they believe that Emmanuel Quickley and Shaedon Sharpe can be a really interesting backcourt. They do this because they envision RJ Barrett being a perfect sixth man in the role that Jeremy Grant really won't take right now. They do this maybe because they want to build a Canadian contingency, down in Portland between Shaedon Sharpe and RJ Barrett. And perhaps they do this just to get off of Jeremy Grant's money. Like maybe it's just that simple. You do this as a Toronto Raptors because this completely gives you the three types of players you don't really have on your roster, which is, a wing who is just kind of 3 and D, not the greatest defender, but certainly not the type of defender that's going to hurt you as much as RJ Barrett does. It gives you a rim protector, like a legit rim roller, rim protector who's been on great teams, and Robert Williams, although a major injury risk. And you take a point guard with some injury risk in Scoot Henderson in the hope that Alex McKechnie can solve him. These are not home run wins, guys. These are not homer trades. I promised you in the beginning when I started presenting these trades that these were not going to be clear wins. These are trades, however, to think about. These are trades where you give up talent and you get back fit. Once again, this one is probably going to make you cry, but I think it makes a lot of sense. The Toronto Raptors and the Washington Wizards trade Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Ochai Agbaji, Garrett Temple for Chris Middleton, CJ McCollum, both expirings, with Chris Middleton having a player option for next year, which is the only reason the Wizards make this trade, and former 7th overall pick, Bilal Coulibaly. Okay, this one requires you to be exceptionally high on Bilal and exceptionally high on the idea of CJ and Chris Middleton. Now, everyone's going to say no to this without thinking about it, but think about what I'm saying. Chris and CJ are insanely smart players. They are around the block veterans. They are not guys who need to start necessarily, but can start in a pinch. They are also guys who do not negatively impact spacing the way that some of the players that you have on this team do. I think Bilal Coulibaly is maybe an undervalued, distressed asset at this point. And yeah, that's never gonna happen, bro. If you want a Keyshawn George, you should have drafted him last year because Lord knows we had a fucking chance and we didn't. So, you know, hey, this is where you're at. So, worst case, CJ McCollum, he's a very talented player. I think he can do a lot of what Emmanuel Quickley can do. He's not a terrible defender. He's not a great defender, but he is a player who adds a little bit of veteran presence to your locker room. This has the potential to be like the epitome of the Rudy Gay trade. This is a lot like the Rudy Gay trade. You have two players you probably aren't going to re-sign. You have a young player coming back in Bilal Coulibaly who you can hopefully develop. He is a very good defender, at least in theory. He is a great athlete. He's a great transition athlete. And I feel like in Darko's space and pace system, you might be able to unlock something in him that the Wizards haven't been able to. Again, bad teams are not, they're mirages, right? They're very, very, it's very difficult to ascertain who's who on a bad team. That's the kind of brilliance of trading for guys on bad teams is you're taking a chance. You don't know how they'll adapt to being on a good team. And it's kind of the same thing with good team, bad team guys, right? You look at Derek White last year, borderline all NBA, borderline all star, right? You look at Derek White this year, total scrub, right? So to the Raptor fans who are like, weren't the Raptors trying to trade RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley for Derek White this past offseason? Yeah, they were. But they were trading for the Derek White they saw last year on a good team. And what you're seeing this year is Derek White without Jason Tatum, and he looks totally different. So the same thing could be said for Bilal Coulibaly. More space to attack, more transition. A highlight reel athlete like this could be unlocked in Toronto. Okay, remember how I said the trades get crazier and crazier? Let's get to something really crazy, and that is the Chicago Bulls trade. Ochai Agbaji, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley for, oh man, Ayo Dosunmu, Jalen Smith, Kevin Huerter, Patrick Williams' contract, and a 2026 first round pick from Portland. Why do you do this if you're the Chicago Bulls? It gives you an absolute injection of immediate talent. I think it gives you more win now players. It gets you off of Patrick Williams' contract. Why do you do this if you're the Toronto Raptors? It gives you a really, really interesting point guard adjacent combo guard adjacent guy that you can probably start right away in Ayo Dosunmu. It gives you a stretch big who can protect the rim in Jalen Smith. It gives you two role players that can probably do a lot better job overall as basketball players than Ochai Agbaji, including Patrick Williams, who, has some connections to Scotty Barnes from Florida State, has turned into a pretty good shooter, is actually playing good basketball this year, and is probably just right now he's just classified by two negative things, which is his contract and his draft status. But honestly, he's just turned into a solid role player. He's not a guy who loses his minutes by a lot. He's just a guy who kind of keeps it even. He's not a high fluctuation guy. And he's also a guy who can actually guard some fours and threes. He makes you bigger. You become a bigger team with this trade. And Kevin Herter, I've always wanted Kevin Herter on this team. He's just a really good movement shooter and maybe gives you a little bit of Grady Dick insurance in case you decide to move off of Grady Dick as well. So you get the first round pick to swallow Patrick Williams' contract. You make this deal. Honestly, the Bulls probably get better. You probably get better too, but you're getting better by subtraction. You're adding players who do a lot without the ball for players who do a lot with the ball. And I think that that is important. Uh-oh. Okay. Controversy alert. We're trading for Ja Morant. Okay. Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Ochai Agbaji, and 2 first-round picks. One is a lottery protected 2028 first. One is a pick swap. Whew. And you get Ja Morant and Santi Aldama. Why does Memphis do this? To reset the culture, to stock up some more draft picks. Obviously, they got a lot of draft picks from the Magic. They are in a full flight rebuild right now. There aren't a lot of teams that are willing to trade for Ja Morant, who is conceived to be on a decline. I did some digging, and I don't know if Ja Morant is necessarily on the steepest decline that he looks like he's on. I think he needs to change of scenery. I'm not saying he's going to go back to being an MVP candidate, but I am saying that the combined effect of Ja plus Santi mitigates any spacing concerns of having Ja as a point guard on this team. I think he injects your team with some much needed athleticism. I think he gives you another shot creator. And if he's happy, and obviously his best years were spent with Darko, so I am just going to, rub the magic lamp and pray to God that Darko Rajakovic can unlock the joy in Ja Morant. This is a mega high risk, high reward type of deal. Okay. Santi Aldama is the safest player in this entire deal. He is the one that has really no floor, no downside. This is a perfect contract for a really good stretch player. Ja Morant is probably the most high fluctuation player because you could get a top 10 player. You could also get a guy who's going to be thinking about retiring in a couple of years because he has too many injuries. So this is the ultimate, swing for the fences type of deal for the Raptors. If it works, you turn into a contender. If it doesn't work, you're probably going to be looking to trade Ja Morant this summer. So I don't know. Is that worth a pick swap and a pick? I think it might be. I think Santi Aldama alone is worth that. So that's kind of where I'm at. You get a young big, you get to run a backup unit of Santi plus, you get to run backup unit of Santi plus Mamu. Like you be mega sized on your second unit. Like you would immediately become a top 4 team in the East with this deal. And I think they get a little bit of a kickstart on their rebuild. Uh-oh. Now, this one's crazy, but I love it, and I hope that this is the one that actually goes down. Now, 9-player trades never work, right? They just don't happen. And I don't know if this one would happen, but this is the craziest trade that I could think of, and it is a 9-player trade between 2 teams. Again, I don't even know if in NBA history this has ever happened. But the Dallas Mavericks are a mess. They've just fired Nico Harrison, and obviously, hey, man, I don't know. Michael Finley might be really smart, but maybe he's in over his head too. So let's go for it. The old let's go big or go home. You are going to take a mega swing on an injury prone point guard, a clearly over the hill albatross contract in Klay Thompson, a much needed rim protecting big in Daniel Gafford, and 2 very good off ball wings in Najee Marshall and Caleb Martin. And you are going to trade Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett, Jakob Poeltl, Garrett Temple, and probably a first. Now, why do you do this? Go big or go home, right? This is the ultimate go big or go home trade because I'll tell you right now, if Klay Thompson is just unhappy because he's in Dallas and he's just going to go right back to becoming a lights out shooter, wow, what an ad for you. If nothing, Klay Thompson is still, at this point, more respected than any player on your team is from 3. He can shoot 12% from 3. He will still be the most positive spacing asset on your team. Klay Thompson is not happy in Dallas. It is obvious from watching him that he's not happy in Dallas. This trade is highway robbery if it works out because you get the best player in the deal. and you might be getting the second best player in the deal, depending on how high you are on Daniel Gafford. But honestly, let's just assume that they get the second, third, and fourth best players in the deal. Fine. You get the fifth, sixth, and seventh best players in the deal too. This rebalances your roster like crazy. This probably means, Grady. I think you'd probably throw Ochai in this deal too. This probably means Grady, Ochai. These guys are probably going to get G League minutes. Honestly, you become way more experienced and veteran laden. You become way more championship ready. Kyrie Irving plus Scotty Barnes is immediate synergy. Kyrie Irving plus Brandon Ingram is immediate synergy. If Kyrie is healthy, and if you believe that Kyrie will be healthy, this deal, honestly, this deal might unlock an Eastern Conference Finals for the Raptors. So you might say Dallas doesn't do it, and I get that. But you have to ask yourself, what is Dallas trying to do right now? Dallas is trying to get younger. They're trying to rebuild around three foundational pieces that they have on their roster. They're not thinking about PJ Washington. They're not necessarily thinking about Najee Marshall and Caleb Martin and Daniel Gafford. In fact, it is widely reported that they will probably eat salary to get rid of Klay Thompson because he is a negative asset at this point. It has yet to be proven what Kyrie's trade market is, but if they want to move off of Kyrie, they should probably do it now before he turns 34 years old and loses an even serviceable year. And after he comes back, you would have to pray that he doesn't get hurt again. I don't think you're completely understanding. So the people who say Dallas wouldn't do it, I don't think you're completely understanding the situation Dallas is in right now. When they trade AD, and that is going to be explored over the next 2 months, they will be doing so for future assets and young players. So here you get 3 players who are under the age of 31. You get 1 player at least who is completely on Cooper Flag's timeline and style, which is Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett. You get 2 players like that. You get Jakob Pertl, who's a perfectly serviceable center who can play backup big to Derek Lively. And the only 3 players that they're really thinking about right now is is Cooper Flag, Derek Lively, and their 2026 draft pick. I'll let you know that 2027, 2028, 2029, they don't control their pick. So a full scale rebuild, right, doesn't make sense. Mars, what do you think about this trade? What do you think about this trade? I'm actually curious. What do you think about this trade? Also, I hope I think you plugged a live on your channel, Mars Talk Sports. You said ball don't lie live. I don't know how that went, but I'm actually going to check it out after this because I'm actually curious what you had to say on that live. So shout outs to you. But any players on Scotty's level of defense yet? Well, frankly, sir, those don't exist. And I don't think Wemby is for sale. Raptors do this in a heartbeat. I would like to think so. I would like to think the Raptors would do this deal in a heartbeat. It completely changes your modus operandi. It changes what you do. But again, consider where the Mavericks are. They cannot trade Anthony Davis and Kyrie Irving for just picks. They can't afford to do that. You need to actually get serviceable players back. Why? Because in 2027, 2028, 2029, Cooper Flag will ascend, and you'll need players who can actually play with that guy. You'll need players who can actually win with that guy. You can't be bad for 4 years and accumulate draft picks the way OKC did because you don't have your draft picks. And I'm assuming that no team is going to give them back to you. So at this point, I think if I'm the Raptors, I sell them on the fact that RJ and Emmanuel Quickley are more on Cooper's timeline and Kyrie is not on Cooper's timeline. And so they are going to end up giving up 3 years of Kyrie. Look, man, this is not as highway robbery as it seems. Obviously, the inclusion of Najee Marshall makes it highway robbery because I think Najee is like one of the most underrated wings in the league, and I think Caleb Martin is amazing. But this is the deal that I would do. This is the deal that I would push for. This is the deal that I would probably add a first to make work. I probably would add a first to make this work. It absolutely synergizes everything Scotty and Brandon Ingram can do. It gives you a lot more defensive balance. And while it doesn't necessarily make you younger, it doesn't make you that much older either. I think Najee Marshall and Klay Thompson, Daniel Gafford, Kyrie Irving, these are exactly the players that I would put around Scotty Barnes and Brandon Ingram. So I'll say one more thing. Okay. Actually, Mars, I did suggest a trade for Keon Ellis. Hold on. I'll show you. My trade for Keon Ellis was here. This was my trade for Keon Ellis. Malik Monk, Darius Arch, and Keon Ellis for RJ Barrett, Garrett Temple, and a first-round pick. Okay, let me move this off. I have often said that the same players that you would put around Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Draymond Green, any big playmaker of that sort, are the same players you need to put around Scotty Barnes. It makes a lot of sense to take Luka's former supporting cast that he was so successful with and just kind of import them into. Sometimes you have to rebuild from scratch, but actually it makes a lot more sense to just take what somebody else did, the project that's already done. Kyrie plus Luka worked really well. Kyrie plus Najee Marshall works. Daniel Gafford plus Luka worked. So Scotty with Luka's ex teammates works really well, really well. And let this message somehow get to Bobby Webster, who I hope, is, I've heard Bobby likes to listen to, Raptors podcasts. I've heard that through the grapevine. I know he does listen to some of them. Dear Bobby Webster, please call Dallas Mavericks and see if they're willing to entertain something like this. Something like this. Something centered on, I mean, if you wanna include PJ Washington instead of Najee Marshall, we're totally cool with that. Like, make something like this work, because that lineup that Luka had around him, Lively, Gafford. It's so interesting that Nico Harrison got fired. He put that lineup around him. It worked. You need to understand who you're building around. You're building this team around Scotty. If you're not building around Scotty, you're building around Scotty and Ingram. The players around them right now just get in their way. It's interesting that Scotty and Ingram can win their lineups, but they can only win their lineups with Jamison Battle, with Grady Dick, with Sandro Mamukelashvili. And the interesting thing about Grady and Mamu and Jamison Battle is they are not even the top 20 players of their archetype in the NBA. So now that you know what works, Mamu works, go trade for Lauri Markkanen. He's 100 times better than Mamu. And he costs more, but it'll work even better. You know what I mean? Jamison Battle works. Okay, cool. Now go trade for a player that's even better than Jamison Battle, who does Jamison Battle things. We all know what archetypes work and we all know what archetypes don't. The interesting thing is, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and what doesn't work for you might actually work for somebody else. Emmanuel Quickley is a player who needs the ball in his hands. He needs to dominate possessions. This offense doesn't work for him. Maybe Dallas feels like that offense with Cooper Flag will work for him. And maybe Emmanuel Quickley can become one of the top 12 point guards in the NBA in Dallas. But it's not going to happen here. So, anyways, shout outs to all of you, man. Shout outs to Mars. Shout outs to, John Hamilton. Shout outs to Roe. Shout outs to, Chad B. Shout outs to Cass, Lori Trade. I've already done too many Lori trades, bro. At this point, my therapist told me I need to stop. So, shout outs to James. Shout outs to Troy Knight. Shout outs to all of you, man. And shout outs to you, Foil. I was not very kind to you in the last live, but shout outs to you. Jamison Battle, top one at what he does. No, he's really not. Respect Jamison Battle, respect Grady Dick, respect whatever, but no Goga trade. Bro, we traded for Gogo Batase. What's wrong with you? Not paying attention? Colosso, we traded for Gogo Batase. Right here. There. Suggs, Isaac, Batase, Tristan Da Silva for a Quickley, Barrett, and probably a first round pick. There we go. So, look, to the people who say, wait a minute, give it some time, Rob, give it some time, let it simmer, let them figure it out. Here's the problem. When you figure out that this doesn't work, the rest of the league will also know it doesn't work. At which point, your negotiation power, you fall apart. Learn from the mistakes of holding on to Pascal. Learn from the mistake of holding on to OG. Learn from the mistake of dumping Dennis Schroeder. Already did one, man. Literally right here. Suggs, Isaac, Batase, Tristan Da Silva for Quickley, Barrett, and probably a first round pick. Okay. I think tomorrow night is going to be a really, really big litmus test for the Raptors. They're going to go up against the full strength Cleveland Cavaliers. They are 6-5. Okay. Shannon saying Toronto is 5-1 in the last 6 games. It's about the rotation, not just starters minutes together. Shannon, you might want to pay attention to this part. because this part tells you that that's not true. It's not just the rotations. Your starters are losing minutes. Everyone said your starters were going to lose minutes, and your starters are doing exactly that. And they're losing minutes precisely because they have too much roster overlap, too much redundancy, not enough space, not enough defense. It's not going to work. And in this video, hopefully, thank God, I have proven to you that this lineup doesn't have enough defense, enough spacing, enough shooting, enough anything. Winning games is a nice mask. But when you get blown out by 15, 20, 25 tomorrow, it's not going to be as easy to tell people, but wait, we're a sleeping giant. Right now, maybe we're just waiting to get Emmanuel quickly and Jakob Pertl back, where you know what I mean? Like copium is a hell of a drug, bro. Everybody says, "Oh yeah, well Yak's got back problems." Well, okay, cool. When he doesn't have back problems, he still can't guard Wemby. He still can't guard Nick Claxton. The back problems are nice. It's a nice little, story to tell yourself, but we're not believing in Santa Claus here. We're trying to be real. And we're trying to be real by saying the front office knows damn well that this starting lineup doesn't work. That's why they tried to trade this starting lineup or two parts of the starting lineup all off season. Nobody wanted to take them. Why? Because they're coming off a losing season. So now you have a lot of teams that are desperate. New Orleans, possibly desperate. Dallas, very desperate. You got a lot of teams that are very desperate right now. Maybe Indiana's desperate. Call them about TJ McConnell. Call about Jarris Walker. Call about Pascal Siakam for all I care. Right? Every starting lineup has a superpower. You could argue the Raptors is playmaking. It is. It is playmaking. So the Raptors are exceptionally good at passing. And, again, that happens when you prioritize having five good passers together. And a lot of guys who come off the bench are also good passers. Jamal Shed, Sandro Mamukelashvili, Grady Dick. These are all positive decision makers. You don't really have a knucklehead on this team. It's interesting, because we're watching playback yesterday. And, and oh my God. Shout outs to Big Ox Bob, who was telling me that Precious Achiuwa was a really good player. And I was like, bro, I watched Precious Achiuwa for 4 years. I know for 100% fact he is not a good player. And he was telling me he's better than that boy you got over in Toronto, CMB. He will give CMB little ass boy, whatever he was saying. And as he was talking, Precious Achiuwa proceeded to go for a fast break. He was on a fast break. And I was like, watch this. Triple, and the ball went over his head, and I couldn't stop laughing. Dude, I was about to die because I could have seen that shit coming. Like I saw Precious on the fast break. I was like, oh hell. Oh hell, bro. I know Precious Achiuwa on a fast break when I see Precious Achiuwa on a fast break. My point is to Shannon and whatever is look, your starters don't work. Your starters have to start out against the other team's best lineup on most nights. Okay. On most nights, you're going to get clobbered. Your second unit's going to come back. They're going to try to drive you back into the game. You can only do this the horse and pony show for so many minutes. You can only say small sample. We're adjusting Ingram. We're adjusting this. We're adjusting that. You can only do that for so long before, honestly, the league wakes up and says, you know what? 285 minutes is not a small sample size. It's not a small sample size. All right. I can show you very clearly here that in your 4-man units or in your 4-man lineups, which are now 176 minutes, 176 minutes of Ingram, Barrett, Quickly, and Barnes, you are posting a negative 6.6 net rating. And I'm trying to tell you here, it doesn't work. It was never supposed to work. I had a video that said the Raptors the Raptors big three have 108 million problems. Yes, that's the point. So 2 of them will work. If you just had Barnes and Barrett, and then you put like the 3 perfect players around those guys, I'd say your upside in the playoffs is very limited. But at least through the regular season, it could work. If you put Lauri Markkanen in place of Brandon Ingram, if you put Keon Ellis and Jalen Suggs as the other 2 players, maybe it could work. Maybe. Or maybe you would need a center in that lineup, actually. So you put the RJ at the 2, Barnes at the 3, Lauri at the 4. Maybe you put Daniel Gafford at the 5 and Kyrie Irving at the 1. Okay, that could work. That could work. 2 of these guys can work, but 3 of them never work. Okay. The second units aren't led by bench players, they're led by starters. In theory, yes, when Ingram is on the court with 4 bench players, he is the quote unquote leader of that bench unit, but he's not leading the defense of that bench unit. And he is also playing against other bench units that are not playing a player as good as Brandon Ingram on the court. So that's kind of the point here. Beating up on second units and getting wins that way is not going to change the fact that in the playoffs, teams don't play their second units, Shannon. Teams aren't going to be resting Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland in the playoffs. So when it goes starter to starter, it's not going to matter that you're great in transition. It doesn't matter that you like to get up in transition. You're going to get obliterated. That's the point. When teams start game planning for you, you're too easy to stop. It's too easy to stop this lineup. You understand what I'm saying? I can play off of Scotty's dribble. I can play off of RJ's shot. I can play off of Scotty's shot. I can play off of Jakob ever doing anything outside of the paint. Like, you understand what I'm saying? Get Day'Ron and Keon. Then get rid of either RJ or Quick for pieces that work around Barnes and Ingram. I agree. Day'Ron Sharpe, one of my favorite young players. Shout outs to Scotty Barnes. Yesterday, he was after the Brooklyn Nets game. He hung out with Day'Ron Sharpe a little bit. There's a caption apparently from somebody saying like Scotty meeting up with his best friend Day'Ron Sharpe. Not his best friend, but certainly a friend. OKC won in part because of depth. Yeah, OKC's starting lineup though didn't post a negative net rating, dude. Anyways, and the Raptors' depth is nowhere near OKC's. You don't have a single player coming off your bench who's as good as Alex Caruso. Let's just be for real now. I mean, we could be for real, right? We can be honest, right? Alex Caruso, you know, if I talk to an average NBA fan and I pull up the numbers and I say, who's better, RJ Barrett, Alex Caruso? I think a lot of people would say RJ Barrett. A lot of people would say RJ Barrett. But they'd be wrong. They would be so wrong. I don't even think they understand how wrong they are. So it just comes down to that, man. Y'all value 20-point per game scores, and I've been reeling against it for 2 years. It doesn't matter that you can score 20. It matters how your team scores when you score 20. That's kind of the point, right? But the starters contribute to minutes won with the second unit. That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. I'm trying to tell you that your lineup, which starts every game, every half, and ends every game, is bad. It loses minutes, and it is designed to fail. That's what I'm trying to tell you. You need to get away from this. So either bench one of your starters and tell them it's for the good of the team and deal with, you know, the consequences of that, and go and start Jameson Battle or Ochai Agbaji or CMB or somebody like that who can balance your roster out, get over the ego, or trade somebody. If you're not going to bench them because you're afraid to lose their trade value, then trade them. Anyways, I'm going to talk to y'all later. This live is an hour and 7 minutes. I feel at this point I'm just ranting. I'll talk to y'all later. Please hit like on this video. 160 of you in here. We get this to 160 likes. That'd be great. Have a blessed night.